Missed an episode of your favorite podcast? Choose from over a decade of content in our archives, not just the latest episode. All free at gcnlive.com.
This is your call to action. Get prepared, America. Economy, survival, energy, disasters. This is USAPrepares.com. Informative radio, educational radio. Interact now by emailing instructor@USAPrepares.com or text at 434-390-7953. Class, please take your seats. Now, your instructor, Vincent Finelli.
Everyone all set, cocked, locked? Here we go. Your dial set correctly to USA Prepares. We're delighted you're in class with us today. Nathan is engineering the broadcast in Minnesota. If you'd like to call us, 866-582-9933, 866-582-9933. And I asked Nathan just before the broadcast started if other broadcasters on the network are talking about the shooting in which 17 were killed, allegedly, in Florida by a young man. Allegedly with an AR-15 type rifle. And he said many are. So we're not going to spend a lot of time on that today. I've already mentioned my solution, which is kind of simple. Have the guys who are already, and gals who are already CCW holders in that school district, wherever these school districts are all over the country, just simply have them spend a little bit of time with the sheriff, coordinate how they're going to act, signals so that the CCW holders don't get themselves shot for having a gun when the sheriff's department arrives or the SWAT team arrives, and have top to bottom people who are already employees, who are known, who have been detected and accepted by the sheriff's office to be of sound mind and be responsible in the village as protectors of the school system. And no one would know who they are because they don't flash their guns. They just keep them concealed in their sports coat or their suit coats or wherever they have them, under their sweaters. And so if there's an active shooter situation, it would be, well, first of all, it would be a lower incidence of it because anybody coming to the school grounds would say, whoa, they've got a lot of guns here. They're already here. Just my thought. And it wouldn't cost anything. Rich Scheben, welcome.
Well, thank you, Vincent Finelli. How are you this morning?
A little warmer than you are. It's what, minus 20?
Minus 22 here this morning.
Yeah, as they would say in, as Amazon says it, Montana. The rest of us would say Montana. Yeah, it's a lot warmer here in Missouri.
Yeah. With that Arctic vortex being split, it's us and Europe are getting hit pretty hard, at least in the western part of the states. And we're not going to see much of warming up until we get into March. Looks like. I mean, it's not going to be minus 22 over the next 10 days, but it's going to be close for lows. It's probably going to be a few days in the higher negatives and single digits for lows. The rest of the month, looks like. And
Rich Scheben's website, offgridmontana.com. He's here with us Tuesdays, 2 hours. Rich, I want to tell you a story. And there's a reason why I want to tell the story. Actually, it's two little stories. I'm going to put them together. So, back in the late 1950s, my mom started washing woolen coats, woolen women's suits, woolen women's dresses, men's woolen suits, coats, and even my dad's Army uniform, his overcoat, his wool overcoat, and his wool Eisenhower jacket. And so she put these one at a time in a laundry tub, washed them, hung them out on the line in the sun to disinfect them, and then she cut them into strips, about 2 1/4 inches wide. And then these strips, she would then sew end to end to end to end and make like a long ribbon, 2 1/4 inches wide, of these suits, coats, jackets, so forth. And then she got these 3 little tools. And what they would do is they would take these strips, and if you pull them through this little tool, it would fold the woolen strips into a flat shape, multiple layers thick. And then she would braid them. And then she would sew the braids together to form an oval-shaped, handmade woolen rug. Now, what did it have in it? My grandmother's woolen clothes that, were worn out. My mother's, my father's, my grandfather's. And so she made this really cool rug, and it was under our dining room table. And when she was nearing completion, it was about 9 feet by 12 feet. And she had a tripod that would hold the braid in process at about chair level. So she could sit in a chair and braid this rug because it was in process for a decade and a half, literally. And when people came over, they would say, "Isn't that cool? So you're making that rug all by yourself?" And she'd say, "Yeah, that's my old woolen long coat, and that's my mother's dress, and that's my father's suit, tweed suit, whatever it was." So it had browns and blacks and grays and blues and olive drab. And so she made this rug, and she wanted to finish it. And people would say, "So when are you going to finish it?" And she'd say, "Well, I'm still working on it." And I said, "Mom, anybody can have a finished rug. But how many have an unfinished rug? So how about not finishing it?" So it was never finished. The reason I'm telling you that story is I was thinking about this all night last night. And it ties to another story. And in our house, we have 2x12 construction for the roof. And it's filled with foam insulation, about half of it. And the other half is blown in fiberglass. And so to blow in the fiberglass, we had to cut these holes and blow the fiberglass in. It was loose fiberglass. And we still had those holes. And I measured it, got up on the scaffold, and over the last couple of days got on the scaffold in the dining room. And I was going to plug up some of these holes, spackle the whole room, because it's never been finished. Not even close to being finished. Well, I looked at our hole saw kit, and I've got a hole saw with a couple arbors and all sizes of hole saws, from 3/4 of an inch to 4 inches. But I didn't have 2 3/4, and that's the size I needed. So I was telling my son this, and I was looking on the internet, and I was looking at Harbor Freight, and I was looking, everywhere. And at Lowe's, they had a hole saw without the arbor. It was $18. And I said, "Absolutely not. I'm not spending $18 on this," because the whole set, the industrial set of hole saws, was maybe $35, complete, shipped, no tax. So I wasn't going to spend half that for a hole saw at Lowe's. So my son said, "Let me go out. Give me a few minutes." He went out in the garage, and he came back in the house and went into the kitchen cabinet, and he got some cans. And then he came back with all the discs that I needed cut out of sheetrock to plug up these holes. And he used a coping saw, C-O-P-I-N-G saw. And that was my dad's coping saw from the 1960s, actually 1962, and I still have it with the original blade. Now, the whole point of this lengthy discussion is how many millennials today would even consider making a rug cut out of used coats and jackets and suits? How many millennials would even know what a coping saw is? And to me, I stayed up all night, literally, no kidding, thinking about what a mess we're in, because we have lost skills like that. And as I look around the house, Rich, you've been here, it's full of antiques. And these antiques were at one time painted green and off-white and all kinds of colors because my mom found them used, put them in the garage, got some paint remover, stripped them down to bare wood, sanded them, refinished them, and now they look like museum pieces. She did that all by herself. No one taught her how to do it. She was so well known in that area of expertise that she used to teach a college class on how to refinish her furniture. Now, I'm not bragging about my mom, but what I'm saying is, when was the last time you heard a story like that? When was the last time you heard of somebody refinishing furniture? When was the last time you heard of someone braiding a rug or using a coping saw or using their intellect, their creativity to solve a problem? As a matter of fact, my son, our son, was so creative, He took an empty soup can, and he was going to attach that with an arbor to a drill. He cut the top off, and he cut teeth into it. And he was going to make a hole saw out of a tin can. The problem was the can wasn't strong enough. He said, Dad, you wouldn't believe how flimsy these cans are today. So, that was a really good try. I thought it was pretty darn clever. But that's the kind of thinking that we're going to need to return to prosperity, to return to greatness again. Not who knows how to type with their thumbs the best on a small, handheld transceiver computer. Rich, any thoughts on that short monologue?
Well, I've given many examples over several years of how we waste money. And I would love to see government grants go to things that are worth teaching the people. Things like the self-sufficiency preparedness school that I talk about in Chapter 15 in the book. I mean, we're getting to the point where we're teaching our kids how to push buttons, manage paper, and be politically correct. They don't have any skill sets anymore. So when you look at what's happening in our demographics and our economic situation, it's pretty obvious. Things like QE has been created to create liquidity for banks to lend, to buy stocks, bonds, etc., and not stimulate the economy. So when the bottom 93% loses opportunities, loses skill sets, and we have a big old crash, what are people going to do when so many people don't even know how to run a garden, put seeds in the ground, cultivate it? And the difference with Monsanto seeds and seeds that are open pollinated. I think there's going to be a lot of concern, and that's one of the reasons why we talk about these things.
Yeah, we'll be right back. Rich Scheben, offgridmontana.com. So, Rich, I was looking at some articles about Sears, previously known as Sears, Roebuck and Company. We've shortened that to Sears, and that was one of the icons in retail. You could get anything that you wanted from a Sears store. You could, in the days of the catalog, you could buy a heating system, you could buy drills, paint, water softener, well pumps, shingles, paintbrushes, clothes, pretty much anything that you wanted, and the catalogs were just incredible. They lost their way. And now, when you look at Sears, heck, they even sold their building, right? And they're leasing back their own building. They made a lot of stupid mistakes. They had the marketplace in their hands. They owned it. And they lost it through stupid decisions. Greed, and more greed. That's my opinion. And so, what's the reason to go to Sears anymore? I can't think of any. They sell Craftsman tools, but they're not the only ones that sell them anymore. Other stores sell Craftsman as well. So they've diminished the value of the Craftsman brand. They're thinking about selling the Kenmore brand. Can you imagine that? They're thinking about selling Kenmore as well. I mean, pretty soon they won't have anything left. And it bothers me. It bothers me because it was such a great company. Was such a great company. I even have the shirt that was given to me on day number 1 when I was a Sears auto mechanic. The shop foreman said, Vinny, come with me. Brought me from the automotive service center. We walked across the big parking lot into the clothing department. I had no idea why we were going there. And he said, this looks like it'll fit you. And he handed me this gray mechanic's shirt. It was like work clothing. I still have it to this day. It still fits. And he said, this is for you. And then he went over to the cashier, and he said, please put that on my account for the store, meaning the automotive department. So it looked like at that point that when they had new employees, they wanted them to look the part and not look ragged, and they wanted to have matching gray Sears auto mechanic work shorts. It's a great, great company. It breaks my heart. It breaks my heart to look at how it's been destroyed from within. Sales are suffering. The brand name is deteriorated. Why would anybody want to go to Sears now? The only reason I would go to Sears today would be to return a broken tool that had a Craftsman name on it. Now, I did buy a couple 50-foot hoses. They're very best commercial hoses, lifetime guarantee. I don't think that lifetime guarantee is going to work out so well for me or anybody else because I don't think they're going to be around. But I wanted a hose that could take the freezing, the heat, and I wanted them as emergency fire extinguishers that we have placed strategically around our farm. Literally. They were $19.99 each plus tax. So it looks like, in my opinion, Sears is not going to survive, a decade. Just my thought. Very, very sad. Any comments, Rich?
Well, you look at American corporations in general, they're leveraged to the hilt. Like I mentioned before the break, we're giving, subsidies to the special interest groups and the lobbyists and the grants who do politically correct work instead of giving money to benefit the people, especially the little people. I mean, this is obviously a design to distract them down and divide the American people by groups. Some budget examples, I think I mentioned this on your show, $700,000 in our newest budget to interpret what Neil Armstrong said on the moon. I mean, this is ridiculous. Subsidizing live theater, especially in New York, for Schumer.
Hold it. $700,000 to
interpret what Neil Armstrong said on the moon.
Now, I can understand $700,000.
Yeah, it's absolutely insane. So the corporations in America, obviously you want to talk about that. Go ahead.
Well, I'm going to burst. Neil Armstrong, I can understand $700,000 if it was spent on research on how they conned us all into thinking that, or making us think that he landed on the moon. I can understand that. But interpreting his words? Come on, really. But that was a special interest. That was just a gift. It was a gift.
Under distractions is also diversions.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Hold that thought. We'll be right back. So there's a new phenomenon starting to rear its ugly head. And that is that restaurants are starting to not take cash anymore. Restaurants are starting to not take cash anymore. And there's a restaurant in New York City. It's called New York City's Commerce Restaurant. And in 2009, they decided that if you don't have some piece of plastic, you can't eat there. Now, it is up to them. However, I do have in my hand a slip of paper. It's got a picture or an image of George Washington on it, and it says Federal Reserve note, and it also says in very small print, this note is legal tender for all debts, public and private. So I've got some confusion here because I've got this allegedly government-issued currency, allegedly backed by the government, that is not accepted everywhere. It's not accepted in some restaurants because, well, it's their business. The restaurant owns the business, and if they don't want to take cash, okay, I understand that. But then why does this note say for all debts, public and private? Maybe the note should be revised to say, use this at your own risk, and it may be accepted or it may not be accepted. It depends. Interesting thought. So this restaurant called New York City's Commerce Restaurant stopped taking cash in 2009. And the quote from that restaurant is, if you don't have a credit card, if you don't have a debit card, you probably don't have a checking account. And if you don't have a checking account, you probably shouldn't be eating at Commerce to begin with. Now, what kind of logic is that coming? That's the quote from the restaurant. What kind of logic is that? That just because you don't have a credit card or a debit card, you probably don't have a checking account. What's that got to do with paying for lunch? I know people who walk around with $100 bills stacked in their wallets. I would think that you could buy lunch for a couple $100 pretty much anywhere. So the problem now is, in my opinion, that businesses, they must have gotten a grant. This is my opinion. They must have gotten a grant to try this. Because nobody in their right mind would say, we only accept specific forms of payment. Now, I do understand why some businesses don't accept American Express because they get charged differently. The merchant discount is different, and it's a pain. I understand that. But not accepting credit cards and debit cards? That seems like something that you would do only if the government said, I'll tell you what, we'll give you a $700,000 grant to see if this works out for you. Well, how well did it work? Well, not so well. They went out of business. They closed. However, there are other restaurants that are experimenting with this. Maybe more grants are being issued to see if restaurants can hang on without using cash. I know people who use cash for darn near everything, including gas. I don't like the idea of not being anonymous if I want to be anonymous. I don't like the idea of having every darn thing I do tracked by a bunch of perverts, pedophiles, and parasites. I don't like it. And I'm doing everything I can to resist it. And for as long as I've been broadcasting, I've been telling people, use cash, use cash, use cash. Why? Because if you stop using it, you won't be able to use it. Rich, any thoughts?
Well, this is definitely going to backfire against the restaurants doing this because the average person can't even afford to go out and eat. 69% of Americans don't have $1,000 in savings. 78% live paycheck to paycheck. So basically what the restaurants are saying is if you're not of the semi-wealthy elite, forget about coming here. But this is a desperation attempt by the powers that be, by the elite, to create some form of digital cash because everything is breaking down right now. And like I mentioned a few moments ago, QE was created for liquidity of banks so they can buy stocks, bonds, land, etc. It has nothing to do with stimulating the economy. And now they find that with QE destroying the dollar, which is by design, you can't grow debt at 6 times the rate of economic growth. So with the dollar being weak, and that's going to question the future popularity of bonds because bonds is debt, and when you sell debt and you admit your dollar is weak, just like Treasury Munchin did about a month ago, it's going to be very difficult to sell bonds unless interest rates go up to make it a little more attractive. So everything is falling apart because if interest rates go up, as we've talked about many, many times, everything goes down. From emerging markets, can't pay the interest in our debt, stock market, the bond market, everything is going to be come down to a big old crash. I mean, even look at the derivatives market. I mean, what is it, 1.5 quadrillion in derivatives, 26 times the global GDP. How the heck is that going to be paid off if we have a big old crash? A derivative, basically, it's a contract between two parties who they determine what the value is, and by changes in the value of that asset, could be bonds, equities, commodities, real estate, currencies. They're basically making a side bet, betting on anything. It's kind of like a casino without the free drinks. So when you sell insurance protection hundreds of times, pretty soon nothing matters anymore because there's no intrinsic value. Nothing means anything. And so with all this hanging by a thread, our credit, our debt, everything, the so-called bank stress tests, which didn't prove anything because the banks are all, the only reason they are upright is because of the QE and the liquidity created by the central banks for the big banks. And even corporations, which you were talking about Sears earlier. I mean, right now, American corporations are in the fleecing moment against the American public. It's not about, when you create trillions of dollars of new debt, not for expansion, new products, services, or people or employees. And the great majority of that money goes to share buybacks to make it look like the company is healthy, and dividends and executive cash through stock options. All these zero interest rate policies have destroyed the bond 93% because all these investors and pension funds are literally chasing yields. And the CEOs and CFOs and executives are laughing all the way to the bank, and they're being protected by the mainstream media and the court systems and the fascist big government system, which has created alliance with these big corporate oligarchies. And then they have the audacity, on top of all that, to, after they've given themselves huge bonuses, and everything looks good on paper, and they've eliminated their core business model, and they say their credit rating is great, they bundle all their bad debt, they're toxic assets, and that's when they sell bonds. And they bundle them with AAA government bonds and other bonds, which probably aren't even AAA. They should be triple D, and they sell it to the public. And these desperate pension funds who are looking, which are all in the red in every aspect of America, of course, with the disclosure saying that all earnings are adjusted, protected by the fascist system and the SEC, which protects the fraudsters. It's kind of an analogy where the FDA and the AMA is owned by Big Pharma. So the little guy gets screwed more and more because the big guys, they have an opportunity to have certain exemptions. They can dodge. They got the lobbyists. They lower the regs when it's convenient for them, and they raise the regs so the small, medium-sized businesses can't compete. So when you look at the bottom line, wages are going down for the great majority of people. The number of good jobs are decreasing. Small business growth is confident, but because right now the statistics in America, only 4 to 6% of Americans make their primary income from being self-employed. So the chance of expanding the economy in this desperate situation that we have is, with credit collapsing, all-time debt is at its highest, disposable personal income, the only reason it's up a couple of little points is because of the super wealthy. And with QT coming, or quantitative tightening, along with lower velocity of dollar growth and our demographic situation, if they raise interest rates, probably another 100 basis points, and I've read so much over the years that if it goes over, the 10-year bond goes over 3%, everything's going to crash. But we're at the point where if they raise interest rates too much, I can't see anything being held together, even with all these books being cooked, because interest rates are a function of wages, economic growth, and inflation. And they're doing everything to import inflation back, which they've actually exported inflation for years and imported deflation. But with all this money printing and the fiat currency confidence going down and the world reserve currency, a.k.a. petrodollar, losing more and more potency abroad over the years, and of course with 2 to 3 times the amount of U.S. dollars being abroad, if all this happens at once and comes back at once, and the big debt holders start to sell treasury bonds, we could be in a deflationary, we are in a deflationary, stagflationary situation right now. But we could go to an inflationary, hyperinflationary situation because everything is so screwed up. They haven't let supply and demand and free markets work. It's all corrupt monetary policies from the central banks. And, of course, with group identity politics, they've taken away all the incentive, anything that's appreciative, anything that makes sense regarding hard work, effort, proven results, and qualifications. So we're in a precarious position, Vince, to say the least.
You think I have a comment? I do.
Oh,
When we come back, I'll share my thoughts. Rich Sheben's with us, offgridmontana.com. You know, class, the telephone is really great when it works. And so during the first couple commercials, during the last break, I listened to an advertisement on GCN with 2 people I know. And one of them it starts out, "Hi, I'm Lee and I'm 41. Well, I know that guy. I know Lee. And then it's followed up on the same advertisement with Stephen Hewer, One World Way. I know Stephen Hewer. So when I heard the commercial, I decided to pick up the phone and dial Lee's number, and we caught up with each other for a few minutes during the break, and it was great. It was really great. And Lee is one of the reasons, principal reason, why I'm on Genesis Communications Network. His name is Lee Wickenhauser. Lee Wickenhauser. He's been on the air with us. He's one of our instructors. A really, really nice guy. So thank you, Lee, for putting us on the air. And in closing, I said to Lee, Lee, I'm not sure why you have us on the air, but I appreciate it. Now, getting back to what, Rich, you were saying. You're talking about debt. You're talking about bonds. You're talking about people who owe money. Well, what I read recently is that more than 80% of American adults owe somebody else money.
Mm-hmm.
More than 80%, this would be on average, of American adults owe somebody else money. And this is the Economic Collapse blog.com. Goes on to say 80.9% of baby boomers, 80.9, that's over 80%, owe money. 79.9% of Gen Xers owe money. And 81.5% of millennials owe money. That's a tough position to be in because you can't get off the treadmill. If you owe money, you've got to earn the money to pay it back, plus interest. And it's really, really tough when, and you and I were talking off the air about some of this last night. And we came up with the same conclusion we've come up with over and over and over again. That conclusion is that the purchasing power of the Federal Reserve Accounting Unit dollar, the fraud, F-R-A-U-D, is not purchasing as much as it used to. And it's increasing with its inability to purchase as much. So it's losing more and more of its purchasing power. And I see that every day. The things that I want to buy keep getting more expensive. I can't believe it. I just can't believe how much things cost now, especially spare parts. And I'm not talking about cheap Chinese electronics, because you can buy a TV, a 32-inch TV for $168. I'm not talking about that. I'm talking not wants. I'm talking about needs, things that you absolutely need. Oil filters, oil, spare parts, headlight lenses, car parts, fuel pumps, pistons, rings, bearings, gaskets, any of that stuff that camshafts, valve lifters, machining. If you need a machine shop to do some work on an engine, wow, that's really going to get expensive. And I mentioned $1,900 to replace 4 brake lines on a Chevy pickup truck. Well, we're helping a guy who needs a transmission. His transmission stopped working. When I mean stopped working, what I mean is he is in drive and he doesn't go anywhere. Regardless of engine RPM, he's not going anywhere. So we towed the truck back to our farm. It's on the lift. And we're looking at it. And so the price of a replacement transmission, this would be like having a rebuilt transmission put in, just for the transmission rebuild and the labor, $1,600, absolute rock bottom minimum. This is for a truck that's worth $3,000 or $3,500. Hard to believe, right? That's where we are. So what do? You put that $1,600 into a truck that's worth $3,500. Now when it's all done, it's worth $3,600. Is that what you do? It's a tough situation. And more of us are getting into that situation as our old machinery wears out. So do we buy a new one that's more flimsy, less durable, but looks better? Or do we keep patching the old ones? I'm patching the old ones. Rich Shealy and I will be right back. Everyone all set? Cocked? Locked? Here we go. Hour number 2 of USAPrepares.com. Rich Shealy's with us, offgridmontana.com. So, Rich, I was reading an article, and it's the AJC.com. It's a newspaper out of Atlanta, Georgia. And it says, Georgia school to drug test students using hair samples. Columbus, Georgia, a private school in East Georgia, attempts to start drug testing its oldest students. The Columbus Ledger-Inquirer reports that Brookstone School in Columbus recently announced the drug testing of students in grades 8 through 12 will be voluntary next school year and mandatory in succeeding years. Brookstone plans to use students' hair samples, which are sent to Psychomedics Corp. to conduct the testing. And the Massachusetts-based company, which is Psychomedics, will then provide test results within a few days. It will automatically test Brookstone students for 18 types of drugs. Alcohol is not among them. But parents and guardians may request the child's test include alcohol screening as well. This is why I would not make a very good employee. This is why I would not be able to hold down a job. This is, just one of the myriad of reasons why Vin Finelli could not hold down a job. If my employer said to me, you know what, Vinny, we're going to test you for drugs, once in a while, whenever we feel like it, I'd say, I don't think so. No, I don't think so. Why? Do you do drugs? No. No, but I think it's an invasion of my privacy. You're going to collect a sample of my DNA, and I'm really not up for that. This is one of those cases where I have nothing to worry about, but I'm not going to let these guys mess around with my DNA, plant something, cross-connect hair samples or urine tests or however, skin samples, whatever they're going to do. I am not willing to let a third party take custody of that sample, provide an alleged test, and produce alleged results that trace back to me. I'm not willing to do it. So if I worked for a company like J.C. Penney or Sears or, any other corporation in retail or an industrial corporation of which there are fewer and fewer of, or a financial institution, I still wouldn't do it. I would not do it. It's not worth it to me. I'd just start my own company and make my own way. I'm not interested in participating in many of the things that most people are saying, well, if you got nothing to hide, what's the problem? Rich?
Well, I agree with you. I think from the short run, if you don't do drugs, which I don't either, I think it could be a benefit to the people. But what's the long-run motive? We all have to follow the money. You talked about the Federal Reserve before the hard break. And you got to remember, it's just not just follow the money, but follow the theme, the meme, the talking point, the narrative. These people want to control everything and sway public opinion and manufacture perception, pity, guilt, and ideology. So the central banks, first of all, they have three motives: to save the banks, especially the six big banks, to save the stock market and Wall Street, and to maintain the status quo, which, as you know, I call it an incognito caste system. So when you think long-term and you shoot pool and play chess, in other words, think 4 or 5 moves ahead, everything that they want to do, it's kind of like gun control. Once they get their foot in the door, pretty soon it's not about the Constitution, the Bill of Rights. It's not about saving lives. It's not about the benefit for the people. It's to benefit the elites so they can have tyranny. Anything that's top-down centralized control with no accountability or transparency from the governing body is going to be way worse for the people, for the little people. So regarding the DNA on with the hair, they could put you at a crime scene with today's AI. I can't tell you how many articles I've written where you can put someone's face or head on a porn star or a bank robbery or any type of crime and literally put somebody at that scene. They've had the ability to take your voice audio and make you say anything you want in the middle of a speech. They can delete words. They can add words. It's the same thing with restaurants and cash. You got to look at the bigger picture, the forest through the trees. If you can't pay cash at restaurants and they want to kill you, and they know you're going to a restaurant on a regular basis or even a semi-regular basis, all they got to do is put your credit card in that machine. In an instant, people who are bought and paid for can come and do anything they want with you, kill you, arrest you, do anything. Now, is anything surprising today? Our Department of Justice, FBI, CIA, they're obviously all bought and paid for. And this is one of the reasons I talk about practice what you preach laws all the time. And this is why I talk about quantitative easing for the people, which I've talked about on your show many times, Vince. And it's basically all about controlling the people. Now, I know you mentioned earlier in the show you didn't want to talk too much about guns, but everything This is just a metaphor, an example, or analogy of how things are planned many years in advance. And we talked about this privately when you called me last night. In 1991, a former U.S. Navy intelligence officer, Milton Cooper, wrote a book that's titled Behold a Pale Horse. And the plan was to use drugs and hypnosis on mentally impaired people to open fire on school kids so the American people will emotionally ask for the government to disarm the people. So when you talk about these, see how I'm connecting the dots here, when you talk about the hair for drug tests, how come only the little people have the consequences for anything that's negative? How come the pharmaceutical companies who create these psychotropic antidepressant drugs, how come they're not liable? How come the physicians are not liable? And it all boils down to the aristocracy versus the serfs. And this is why, folks, when too many low-information voters are screaming and chanting and losing the ability to have intellectual communication, and they say, no, it's a left-right paradigm. No, it's Democrat versus Republican. This is the veil of stupidity that they're putting on the people. I'm not saying there's an ideology difference between conservatives and liberals, but basically, when you look at things like schools versus the federal court system, where the very wealthy federal judges hang out, and the Oscars, and where the super celebrities and athletes hang out, they have enough arms to hold off Russia for a whole weekend at these venues. Why can't we do this at our schools? See, it's the aristocracy versus the serfs, people, and this is what the theme of this segment is about, because it's up to the people to create solutions for themselves, because the elite, the aristocracy, want the bottom 93% to have infighting, to have chaos. A divide and conquer strategy is absolutely necessary for them to keep their power. But as I always say, it has certain repercussions, because it destroys America from within when you lower the bars of standards and expectations by rewarding mediocrity based on what group you're in. And everything suffers for the bottom 93%. We don't have ingenuity, productivity, innovation, knowledge, opportunity. We've turned America into a diminishing returns country. We have two economies. We have two situations in every aspect, from the elite to the serfs. And what we need to do is create solutions for the little people. And when I say little people, it's the bottom 93% of income earners. And that is, it's time to start thinking about homeschooling, or getting your kids out of government public schools, creating community neighborhood schools, bring in speakers who have practical experience in the private sector, who aren't bought and paid for teaching theory, who are teachers fresh out of college. You know, we could put our American vets to work by making them security in schools. They're already vetted. You know, they know how to use weapons. Let's take people who have contributed to society and fought for our country, even though they're fighting for the bankers and the hierarchy of the military-industrial complex. At least they've proven themselves. And take some of these heroes who have been in combat and make them, or ask them to be, and hire them to be guards at our schools. Now, in the USA, we have the highest ownership of guns per capita, with 90 guns per 100 residents. Let me repeat that. In America, we have the highest ownership of guns per capita, with 90% of the guns per 100 residents. The per capita murder rate in the U.S. is 111th in the world. 111th, despite being number one for gun ownership for residents. Now think about that. And if you took away our sanctuary cities and no gun zones, which have our highest murder rates, not only can you come to the conclusion that you'll never get rid of guns, you'll never get rid of crime. There's always going to be black markets. And the only way to control it is with examples I just mentioned earlier. Vince?
Yeah, he talked about William Cooper, and I used to listen to him on the radio. Got a couple comments about that when we come back. Who is William Cooper? His best-known work? Behold, a Pale Horse. We'll be right back. Rich, you mentioned William Cooper. I used to listen to William Cooper on the radio, shortwave. He was brilliant. He was articulate, very knowledgeable, succinct. He seemed to have knowledge that other people didn't have. And as you mentioned, he said that the government encouraged the manufacture and importation of military firearms for the criminals to use. This is intended, as he said, to foster a feeling of insecurity, which would lead the American people to voluntarily disarm themselves by passing laws against firearms, using drugs and hypnosis on mental patients in a process called Orion. The CIA inculcated the desire of these people to open fire on schoolyards and thus inflame the anti-gun lobby. This plan is well underway and so far is working perfectly. The middle class is begging the government to do away with the Second Amendment. So William Cooper was exposing all that, and if you look at these people who were involved in these shootings, like Cruz and Lanza, alleged shootings and alleged shooters, you'll just look at them. They look strange. Their facial expressions is really, really odd and eerie. Nothing like anyone that you've ever seen. And in Cruz, walking away from the alleged shooting in Florida, wasn't running. He was just walking away, calmly went in to grab a bite to eat at a fast food joint. I mean, who would do that? Who would do that after allegedly murdering 17 people? Who would do that? This guy, if you look at the videos of him at his court appearance, he's out of it. He is absolutely, positively out of it. So it sure looks to me like this is an inside job. It looks like it's been set up, and looks like it's been designed to encourage the weak among us to beg the government for protection from the few. And as I said before, if we had people who were walking around with firearms, the schools would be much, much safer places.
Vince,
however,
Yeah, well, what do you think Fast and Furious was with Obama and Holder? They gave away American guns to our enemies, from drug cartels to ISIS. It ended up in their hands, killing Americans. It was basically designed to get rid of the Second Amendment. It's analogous to Obamacare. It was designed to destroy the middle class, make them poor, and create a single-payer system. We all have to look with foresight, folks, because everything is planned years in advance. It's a connect-the-dots situation where they, through incrementalism, change people's minds, and they get the low-information voter to get emotional and not use objective facts. It's basically the globalists, their wealthy NGOs, their mouthpieces like our lawyers, judges, politicians, and bankers who are bought and paid for as well as our intelligence agencies. They're free to buy sedition, treason, espionage, and not be punished. And until we replace our cabinet and our Congress with average Joes, and have practice what you preach laws and have them implemented, and give QE to the people, which I've gone over on this show and more in detail, until the people start creating solutions and ideas for themselves. And see, this is why they basically go after groups, and they demonize, discredit, and delegitimize any individuals who report the fake news. And this is why they love using satire, especially on late-night shows, to try to coerce the low-information voter that you're cool if you believe this narrative. And we all have to become thinkers, because too many people are being cultivated to be followers. Too much of America is being groomed to be distracted, dumbed down, and divided. And that's basically what most of these themes that we talk about, Vince, are about. It's the aristocracy versus the serfs. It's the grooming and the cultivation that's destroying our culture, traditions, and heritage. And that needs to be the main theme, and we need to attack it as the bottom 93%. Vince?
We had a couple of comments on what you just said, and a little bit more about Cooper. We'll be right back. You know, Rich, you mentioned 4 words in the same sentence, I believe. And those 4 words were lawyers, judges, bankers, and politicians. And as you were saying that, I was thinking, if Mark Twain were alive and among us, what might he craft as a description of lawyers, judges, bankers, and politicians? And I believe he might have thought of something like this. These are people who attract disrespect. I really believe that. Getting back to William Cooper. So William Cooper was a broadcaster, and he was interested in UFOs, and he talked about them and the militia and anti-government subculture in the late 1990s. And he was convinced that he was personally being targeted by William Jefferson Blythe Clinton, one of our CEOs in this country, and the Internal Revenue Service. In July of 1998, he was charged with tax evasion. An arrest warrant was issued, but William Cooper eluded repeated attempts to serve it. In 2000, the year 2000, he was named as a major fugitive by the United States Marshal Service. In November 5th, 2001, Apache County Sheriff's deputies attempted to arrest Cooper at his Edgar, Arizona home on charges of aggravated assault with a deadly weapon and endangerment stemming from disputes with local residents. Now, these are charges. These aren't convictions. These are just charges against him, right? And so a gunfight ensued, an exchange of gunfire in which Cooper shot one of the deputies in the head, and Cooper was fatally shot. And the Federals reported that Cooper had spent years evading the execution of a 1998 arrest warrant, and according to the spokesman of the Marshal Service, he vowed that he would not be taken alive. It's William Cooper. Absolutely brilliant man. He awakened many of us, including me. So his life was cut short, 58 years old, by the federales. And he talked about things like AIDS, HIV, man-made, used to target blacks, Hispanics, and homosexuals, and that a cure was made before it was implemented. He's been described as a militia theoretician. So that's William Cooper. Rich Scheben, here's something pretty interesting. So the CIA, in an article on ZeroHedge.com, former CIA chief admits U.S. meddling in foreign election. Let me say that again. The former CIA chief admits meddling in foreign elections. James Woolsey. He appeared on Fox News. And so he was asked, have we ever tried to meddle in other countries' elections? And he responds, oh, probably, but it was for the good of the system. He was asked by Laura Ingraham, we don't do that now, though. We don't mess around in other people's elections. And he responds, well, only for a very good cause, in the interest of democracy. Mm-hmm. So here's the CIA meddling in the elections of other countries. And then we get frosted when there's an alleged claim that Russia's meddling with ours. And that's a really difficult situation to figure out. Who's meddling with who? Who's paying whom? Whose side are they on? Are they on both sides, one side? The whole thing stinks. But the other countries can say, well, hey, we're just we're just trying to learn from you guys. We see what you guys are doing, overthrowing governments and things like that. So we're just trying to protect ourselves and our interests. Any thoughts on that?
Well, yeah, I can go in a lot of different directions. It's very obvious that we're being force-fed ideology and theory and philosophy in order to divide the American people and keep the status quo for the elites. Now, if you read anything from Marx, Alinsky, Frankfurt School, Cloward and Piven, the Communist Manifesto, it's one of the reasons why we're so drunk on the Kool-Aid of political correctness. And all you have to do is read a little bit of it, folks, and you can see that this sets the stage for government interventions, confiscation, redistribution of wealth, the use of group identity politics, a.k.a. victim group status, a.k.a. protectionist group status, in order to degrade, disrespect, and insult so many different people. So, when you hear all these politically correct buzzwords, humanitarian, sustainable city, global warming, that's now climate change, it's all based on the premise to create a loss of individual rights for the little guy. And the reason why Trump, from what I read, is so targeted and the elite foment so much hate against him is because he said he wants to give America back to the people. And this is one of the reasons why we're on the air, is to talk about ideas and solutions for the bottom 93%. And Vince, if it's okay with you, I know we're getting close to the end. I would like to do 3-4 minutes of a rant, if you are okay with that.
Yeah. Go ahead. And then,
okay, thank you.
Then we'll talk about the Church of England and how they are conspiring against the people. We'll talk about that. Go ahead.
Yeah, now, folks, when you think when the elites tell you how rosy things are and how great the economy is, just think about some of the things. I just wrote down a few things here. Okay, our savings is a 10-year low. Our debt is incredibly high, 60-year low for home ownership. Credit is collapsing. We have less freedom, less liberty, more bureaucracy, violence, brainwashing, militarized fascist, lawless, corrupt, untrustworthy, divisive warmongers basically running the show. There's no burden of proof unless you're a certain group. It depends on what group you're in. The powers that be create the problems, the reactions, and the solutions where we barely even have any say. There's no due process of law in so many areas. They detain people, Americans, indefinitely. No citizen rights, mass surveillance and censorship, secret wars and secret societies and secret courts. Pedophilia runs rampant with no accountability for the elite or a certain tiered accountability for what group you're in. Self-serving, corrupt Congress. Power corrupts. Practice what you preach laws. I talk about that almost every show. I think Vince Finelli will agree with that when appropriate. I give specific examples. And you would think somebody in Congress or somebody higher up in the hierarchy would say, hey, this is a great idea, let's do this. But they don't want accountability at the top. They have an addiction to power, money, and control. And Congress voted themselves full pensions after one term. Now, you really think that they're in their seats for our protection and our benefit and our prosperity? Please call me. I have bridges to sell, okay? Look at the overuse of eminent domain. We give away billions for personal gain and campaign contributions. Lobbyists, special interests, tax, government grants, supersedes free markets and supply and demand. We have pork barrel spending, some which I mentioned today. Police state that's been militarized. The FBI, CIA, NSA, a lot of our intelligence agencies basically are owned by the highest bidder. Two big antitrust monopolies of the too big to fail corporations in America. The Googles, the Facebooks, the Twitters, the mainstream medias, all owned not just the elites of the world, but have too much influence by China. More China influence than the American people. The elite controlling the narratives, the memes, the themes, the talking points to distract them down and divide the people and feather the nest of the elite at the same time. We have 3 times minimum the leverage of stock market risk than we had in 2009. And what do? They keep printing money, and they're not even mentioning that it's quantitative easing right now. We have the highest margin debt ever. Do you know that 2017 was the largest year of money printing for the Fed, the Bank of Japan, and the European Central Bank, printing over $2.5 trillion of money in a single year, and they didn't even call it quantitative easing. And what they do is they put it into the equity markets. I told you what the big corporations are doing. Nothing is for the benefit of the people. It's almost like the elite are feathering their own nest, so when everything crashes, their billions turn into millions, and our thousands or hundreds turn into debt. And people keep making the mistake of calling Democrats progressives. They have been hijacked by the globalists, okay? Stop this ideology. Stop this left-right paradigm. You're being fooled. You're being used. You're being played. You're being duped. So what the left are really doing is they're chasing and looking for voters. They're not trying to create prosperity or ideas and solutions for the bottom 93%. Google, Facebook, Twitter, robotics, automation, artificial intelligence is going to control everything. And they are even trying to use these tools to eliminate free speech, which is in our Constitution, our Bill of Rights. So what we need to do is talk about ideas and solutions for the little guy, but we need to implement them. We need to do something. Whether you write a book, whether you do radio shows, whether you do talks, there's so many different ways to get involved. And people, if we don't, we're going to lose every freedom and liberty that millions of combat soldiers gave their life for. Vince?
No disagreement. We come back and talk about churches, how they're selling you out. No kidding. You won't believe it. We'll be right back. So, Rich Scheben, offgridmontana.com. I've been looking at the call screen all during the broadcast, and not one person has called. And I've asked the network, I said, is that because we don't have any listeners? We don't have any students? No one's paying attention to us? Or is it because those who are paying attention do not want to alter the direction of the discussion by calling us? So I don't know what it is, but we haven't gotten any calls. So this is not even a risk, because if we don't have any listeners or any students paying attention, what I'm about to say next, no one's going to hear it anyway. Because if we did, this might cause some of our class to jump ship. Here we go. So, who is the head of the Church of England? Well, the Supreme Governor of the Church of England is a title held by the British monarch that signifies the title of leadership of the Church of England. That'd be the Queen. Okay. So, here's what's happening. Churches across Britain will be used to boost broadband, mobile phone, and Wi-Fi connectivity in rural areas under a deal struck between the government and the Church of England. They're going to use the church spires as towers. And this agreement with the Church of England, and this is American Free Press, AFP.com, this agreement with the Church of England will mean that even a 15th century building can help make Britain fit for the future, said Matt Hancock, the Minister for Digital, Culture, Media, and Sport. The Church of England has 16,000 church buildings, and around 65% of its churches are located in rural, they call them communities, making them ideal hosts for the digital infrastructure. So the Church of England is doing this. Okay. So you can tell I'm frosted, right? So how can you help? So if your church is even engaging in a discussion with any cell phone companies that they're going to do this, then they will be in collusion with the cell phone companies, which are in collusion with the government, which is monitoring, tracking, storing evidence that can be used against you in things that you might say, text, email, or tweet, or more. Okay? What what websites you go to, things like that, because now the phone is the device, right? It used to be the computer, now it's the phone. So this using of the church spires is a revenue-making business. Now, churches didn't used to be in the revenue-making business. They would take donations, but they weren't in a business per se. Well, this puts them into the business arena. A profit. They're going to receive a profit for doing this. Doing that makes them like other businesses, and they should be paying taxes. So if a church engages in a business like this, selling the use, renting the use, leasing the use of its spires, or spire, they should lose their tax-exempt status. Now, if I were a member of a church that did this, I would make it known far and wide that I object, and that I'll take my business elsewhere. Praise the Lord. Makes me angry. I mean, I am livid, absolutely livid. But Scheben, do you have any thoughts on that?
Well, just like what I said earlier with incrementalism. Here in America, the analogy would be that they turn churches into 501c3 churches, and they compromise certain things so they can have certain longevity, keep their business, have certain exemptions, write-offs, and the churches are desperate, the pastors are desperate. I read years ago that we're losing about 1,000, 1,200 pastors per month in America. So they're getting desperate, and they're willing to spy on their own people for their own benefit, and that's a real shame. Yes?
Including facial recognition software. So your church leadership can call you and say, are you okay? We haven't seen you in church. Are you okay? We missed that donation. Yeah, no kidding. Seriously, that's what's happening. Rich Scheben, thank you so much for being with us today.
Always a pleasure.